Right, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'm Becky, and I'm the Chief Exec of the English Association, and I'm really pleased to, well, be along for the ride this afternoon. I get to just sit back and enjoy, which is lovely. The EA is a learned society and a membership association, which was founded in 1906 to promote, support, and celebrate the discipline of English studies. We cover all stages of education, from primary and early years through to secondary and further education, to higher education and beyond. And we cover all parts of the discipline across language, linguistics, literature, and creative writing. Events like this one are made possible by the fantastic contribution of our volunteer speakers. So thank you ever so much to Robert Eagleston, Julia Bell, and Douglas Cowie for giving us their time so generously this afternoon. And they will be introduced to you properly in a moment. Our members also make it possible to keep these events free and open to all by paying their membership fees. So if you would like to contribute to the national conversation about English and help support our discipline, please do consider joining us. Membership starts at just £29 and enables you to support our events and campaigning work for a whole year, and you get access to a range of member benefits, including online access to all our journals. Right, enough from me, and it's my pleasure to hand over to Bob. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. How nice to have you here this afternoon. Um, so I'm going to introduce our two interlocutors because they're going to be in conversation. Um, so the reason we're here is to discuss and celebrate this book. Oh, it's gone blurry. Between the Lines by Julia Bell. So Julia Bell is a writer and professor of new writing at Birkbeck, University of London. Her work includes poetry, lyric essays, and short stories published in a range of national and international publications and recorded for the BBC. She's the author of three novels: Massive 2002, Dirty Work 2007, and The Dark Light, a very well received poetry collection, Hymnal 2023, the Creative Writing Course Book from 2001, which I'm going to mention again in a minute, a very well received, influential short essay called Radical Attention, which in some ways is the precursor to this book Between the Lines, which we're going to be talking about today. Another precursor is a fantastic essay called In Praise of Bad Writing, which I taught this term, my students lapped up. Julie's going to be in conversation about her new book, Between the Lines, with Dr. Douglas Cowie. Douglas teaches creative writing at Royal Holloway University of London. It's a BA from Colgate University in Hamilton, New York, and a PhD in creative writing from University of East Anglia. He's the author of four novels: Owen Noon and the Marauder, 2005, Sing for Life, Tin Pan Alley, and its companion, Sing for Life, Away You Rolling River, 2014, Noon in Paris, Eight in Chicago. And these are all novels about literature, music, and politics, and their kind of interaction. But the reason we've got them to talk to each other today is not just because they're fantastic, interesting writers, but because they're both highly committed teachers and thinkers about creative writing. Douglas was involved with the creative writing A level, but also been involved nationally supporting creative writing. Julia Bell too, a national advocate for English and for creative writing. Um, and as part of our discipline, creative writing is a thriving, growing part of it, with more and more important reflection on it, of which this book is absolutely one, it seems to me. So, Julia, I'm going to begin asking and then let the conversation between you and Douglas flow. Just, Julia, can you just give us a bit of origin and context for your book Between the Lines?
Thank you so much, Bob. So the book has started with a commission to write an essay by Olivia Francini and Lucy Mercer, who are working in Goldsmiths in Exeter, and we're working on a project called Too Little Too Hard, which was a website, and now it's actually going to become a book. The website's kind of gone down, and the essays that they published on that website are going to be published in a book by Peninsula very soon, which I'm really excited about. And it gave me an opportunity to spend the summer thinking about what I've been doing. And also I'd done an event with a writer called Lamorna Ash, and she said to me, "Have you never thought about writing about your job?" And I was like, "Well, I've done it. I wrote the creative writing course, but why would I have anything else to say?" And then I started really thinking about, well, what have I been doing for the last 25 years in the classroom? And part of that thinking kind of involved kind of taking myself back into the classroom and thinking, well, what's been happening? What's going on? Particularly in the writing workshop, which is a very specific sort of method of teaching, which is where you would have 12 people, maybe a maximum of about 16, sharing their work in progress, reading it, feeding back on it, discussing it. It was the way that I was taught at UEA, but it's a very familiar model. It goes all the way back to the 1950s to the Iowa workshops when they started. And I wanted also to do a show, not tell. So I wanted to write something that took the reader into that space as if they were in the room with me. So every chapter is 2 or 3 little examples of students who have gone through a process of submitting some work, having it fed back on. And I think that that was another important part of the book, was to show that the teaching that happens is Socratic, it's dialogic, it's sitting in a room and talking to each other. And that for me, this was one of the things that sort of really started to resonate with me as I was writing, is that the arts of language, the arts of English, is reading, writing, listening, and speaking, the 4 things. And I think 2 of those things we know how to teach very, very well, the writing and the reading part of it. But the listening and the speaking seemed to me to be one of the things that I really wanted to sort of show. I wanted the reader to feel the feelings that the students are feeling and the things that I'm feeling while I'm doing the teaching, while I was writing it. So that was a very important part of the whole project, I think, for me. And then I think I started to really think about it in terms of the political project, the skills that are coming out of the workshop. And I read quite a bit of Simone Weil on attention, because I'd been reading her because I'd written Radical Attention. And that also started to sort of percolate in my mind about what was going on between the people in the room. And I kind of want to suggest that what's going on in the workshop, I think, is closer to a kind of democratic practice of listening to each other, letting people speak, letting them be heard. And I suppose the book, in a way, is a love letter to that practice. It's a defense of it, particularly at the moment where I think it's being questioned from several directions at once. We get, people saying, oh, you can't teach creative writing, people who now say it can be done by a machine, and, the university system that wants to know what creative writing stands for. And I suppose my book is trying to make an answer for all of those things. So, yeah, that's my short answer. But the book is a much longer one. I don't know. You want to pick up on that?
Does it match your experience, Douglas, the book?
Yeah, we were just you can call me Doug, by the way, Bob.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's one of the like strange experiences of reading this. Was like was kind of just going along. Like, I've been teaching in creative writing for a really long time, and before that I was a student of creative writing. Like, even in high school I was doing creative writing classes and stuff, and so I have quite a long, like my whole adult life has been taken up with these kinds of things, not unlike Julia. And like, just reading a lot of I was going to ask you what your experience of reading this book was about, because like for me, I was like, a lot of it I was just going like, yep, 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 yep. And it was kind of nice. It was like, it was a weird reading experience for me from that point of view, but quite a nice one ultimately, because it sort of, and it wasn't like I didn't have anything to learn from it, don't get me wrong. Like, I definitely, there was lots of stuff I was writing down in my notes and underlining passages and thinking like, oh, that's a nice way of kind of orienting that idea, or it makes an idea more concrete. Or there's things where I was like, not necessarily arguing with, but I see in a slightly different way, but not a fundamentally different way. And it was kind of nice to see those debates. Like, there's a lot of debate happening, I think, even though it's like I'm looking at Julia when I say this, like one author writing this thing, because you've got these examples of students coming in and the debates between students, and you kind of see you as a teacher responding to those things, rethinking your own position about things. And there's that kind of, which is part of that democracy question, right? Like creating this space that opens up room for agreement amongst disagreement. This is a slightly incoherent answer I realize I'm now giving, but like it like, I just found myself like so often going like, yeah, that's exactly how it is. Like, yeah, I already knew that, but like, it's nice to see it written down that way, which is a different thing. It's a very different like I guess there's probably people listening who have read creative writing, like course books, like the one that Julia
Mm.
co-wrote quite a long time ago now. And there's a lot of books like that, and they're really useful books, and I still use those kinds of books. But they have a very different attitude to them because they're about like, here's a thing you can try. Have you thought about character working this way? Have you thought about character working that way? And like your character on, or your character on chapter, I was going to say your chapter on character isn't that kind of chapter. It's like, oh, here's how character becomes this other thing. Here's this thing that we're thinking about, and this is why we're thinking about these things. This is a very long answer, but I wanted to come back. So I'm going to turn the question back on you, Bob. Because I wondered what it was like for someone who's not involved as directly in that world. Like, because it seemed to me like it might seem really eye-opening to people who aren't me. I don't mean that in a jerk way. I don't want to sound like a jerk, but like,
Well, I will answer that. I'll be as brief as I can, but I'm really keen for Julia to talk, so I don't want to. So one of the reasons I was really keen to do this event and to kind of spread the word about this book is because it seemed to me, as a literature and kind of theory teacher, that lots of the things I really did recognize, but there was something about not just the showing, not telling that Julia talked about, which gives it a whole kind of life as well. But there's something about the intensity of the creative writing workshop and all the kind of psychic demands it makes, which went much more closely to the core of what I think great teaching in the humanities or in English or in is. And it really spoke to me. And one of the things I was hoping to end up by talking about at the end, rather than right at the beginning, is all the things that non-creative writers can take from the representation of the teaching of creative writing, and that seems to be unbelievably important. So I think that the discipline of English is being buoyed up not just by the numbers that come in from creative writing, but from the way in which that is changing and reshaping our entire engagement and thinking about literature. So you can tell that was a kind
Yes.
of grandiose finishing point. But perhaps, Julia, you'd like to
now you're going to have to
think,
rethink your finishing point.
Julia, would like to
Yeah.
think about that a bit.
Well, that's what I was trying to do. I think we really, really need to make the humanities has never been more important and it's never been more under attack. And I want to show the thinking that happens in a room between people is the stuff that can't happen in any other context. It doesn't happen through the machine. And also, I think it's really important to think about creative writing as the knowledge skill that gets you to the place where you can do reading and critical thinking. Because I think the issue with English, and I don't want to I'm not at all interested in having some division between I think they're both complementary. They need to be taught in a complementary way. And that the method that creative writing offers to kind of deep dive and doing the reading and doing the thinking and doing, going off and becoming a specialist in a particular area of literature, none of that can happen unless you've got attention and you've got a sort of baseline of skills that people can bring to the room. And those skills are really being diffused in some ways by the kind of, I don't want to say the threat of new technology, because I think we should engage with it and think about it. But I do think that there are things that need to, I don't want to be a Luddite about it either. But I think that there are things that happen in a creative writing workshop that are very specific in building interpersonal, interrelational skills of thinking through a problem, of not necessarily, people come, one of the things I show, I think, in the book is an example of somebody who's come to the workshop to be disruptive, who's essentially what we might consider to be a bit of an incel. And through the process of actually having their work workshopped and read and looked at by other people, at the end of the process of the course, they've softened, and they've softened enough to be able to listen to the points of view of other people, to be able to discuss in the round, the philosophy, the psychology, the politics of the things that are being presented in the room. And they've kind of, I want to say it's about emotional education. That's what Aristotle said teaching rhetoric was about, was that it was the education of the emotions. And to a certain extent, we've always argued that was what English was really good at. But if people aren't reading anymore, how can we show that we've still got something to teach that can help people to develop those emotional and intellectual skills? And I really, really think that the method, it's about showing the method in action. That's what I was trying to do. I was trying to point a camera into the room and go, this is how, in various scenarios. And I'm glad that Doug was arguing with me about some of the sort of discursive things, because that's the point. You know, I want to just there's so many ideas being thrown at you in this, because every single student is writing their own individual piece of writing. And that individual piece of writing is throwing up its own concerns, its own philosophies, its own psychology, its own ideas. And every single person in the book, I think, represents a little capsule of issues that we may discuss. So I really wanted that sort of sense that it's a method rather than a craft book, a how-to book. You know, this is the 10 steps of how you can become a better writer. There's a billion of those books out there. I wrote one myself when there wasn't any of those books out there. And I think we're now in such a different scenario to 2001 when that book first came out. And we're in this situation now where I really think English as a subject has an enormous, or literature, I think, as a subject, has an enormous amount to offer and is incredibly, even more necessary than it was last week, because we've looked at the results of the local elections and the kind of polarized ideas and the opinions and the stories that people are telling each other about what's happening. I think the only antidote to some of that is to get people together in a room to talk to each other and to listen to each other and to tell each other stories, because all of these atomized individuals have been atomized into story boxes by the phone, and they're not actually speaking to each other. And then on top of that, I would say that we've lost a lot of adult education space. I think 2/3 of the spaces where people would come, adult education courses have closed. You know, we've lost Schuster, we've lost community centres, we've lost libraries. And this has happened accretively. It's happened very slowly, and then it's happened very quickly. The pandemic happened. And where do people meet to come together as individuals from completely different backgrounds, except for in a classroom, and perhaps except for in a classroom at Birkbeck, because I'm doing adult ed, I'm not just teaching sort of a particular cohort of 19-year-olds. I'm teaching a group of older students who come from all kinds of walks of life, which seems to me to be now an incredibly kind of precious resource and space, which we don't have access to so much anymore. So I think radical attention was me kind of howling into the wind, going, "Oh my God, everything's dreadful," and then getting fed up with myself and thinking, "You can't just, you know, we can all howl about how dreadful everything is. I want there to be some kind of prescription for that." So writing between the lines was also a moment of prescription. I wanted to write something that showed a method, that showed a positive kind of, and show people learning. I mean, what's not to like about that? Have we learned everything we need to know in life? No, we haven't.
No, I was hoping we had. Like,
Yeah, you think you can stop now and put your feet
yeah,
up?
one of the like, I think one of the things about that is like, I'm gonna read some of your book.
Ah,
um,
gonna quote
in
me
a
at myself.
Yeah, lucky. In a moment. But like, is that the specific way that a creative writing workshop works that makes it different? And that is, I think, to come back to Bob's point earlier, as our question earlier, is like, is applicable elsewhere, is finding ways that like everybody in a creative writing classroom, it is a democratic space because everyone has to meet on the same terms, right? Like everybody has to submit their work at some point, and that's a things that makes you vulnerable. uh some people are, feel less vulnerable about that than others. With more experience, you feel less vulnerable, but you still have to do it, and you still have to sit there and listen to a bunch of people who you learn to know better over time. But at the beginning of term, you don't know, and at the end of term, you'll know better and submit your work. You have to listen to them. You have to decide like whose advice is good and whose
Mm,
advice is not. It's like one of the first things I always say to my students is like, you're going to figure out that some people, when they open their mouths and tell you about your work, that they have nothing helpful to say to you. That person might even be me, like that's fine. That's part of what you're here to learn. And that's like um but then everyone else has to listen to everyone anyway, and has to make those decisions and has to reflect in order to make those decisions. And everyone has to be serious about everyone else, whether
mm,
they like their work, don't like their work. Some of the best advice I got over the time that I was studying creative writing was from people, including people teaching me, especially one person teaching me. I'm not going to name them, but like,
mm.
who didn't really like my work. And I knew they didn't really like my work, but they gave me really good advice because they took me seriously anyway. And that's like a
Hmm.
big thing. And it's like, and that's a pretty safe environment to do it in. Like if I do that in the street, I get punched, whatever. Like you do it in a creative writing, we're all there together. We all have the same goal. And to have to think seriously about work that isn't that interesting to you is really helpful thing, even more than getting advice from someone who's really interested in your work. Now I'm going to read a bit of Julia's book. It's like literally page 2, which, oh no, it is actually page 2. It's not the first page, it's the second page. Just like the number says. Um, because I think you map out really neatly in this introduction the kind of like, here's what's at stake, and it all sounds really nice and simple. I don't mean that in a pejorative way at all, far from it, because then the rest of the book starts to like fill in all the material that shows how complicated these basic principles are, but these basic principles are so important. And like, so this is just like 3 short sentences over 2 paragraphs from just before the Aristotle thing. From page 2, you say, we learn the most through our bad writing, through witnessing the mistakes of ourselves and others. And it's not that we don't learn from good writing, but like this is an interesting and very, like, it sounds simple. Oh, I learned so much from my bad writing. But then like when you start to understand what that means, and like listening to someone tell you your writing is bad is like kind of a horrifying experience that you then you learn a lot. Anyway, then in the next paragraph, attention to when we pay attention to storytelling in the classroom, there is a process of emotional education that happens by default. And I think by default, like that was one of those things where I got a little bit angry already on page 2. And I was like, then I understood what you actually meant. And it made me like, it's not that it happens whether you put effort in it or not. It happens by default because of the effort you put in. Like, this is the thing that, like, whatever you're concentrating on, my story about elves and wizards, or my story about robots, or my story about 2 people in love, or my story about rock and roll, I'm going to go through a process of emotional education anyway. And the more I attune myself to that, the better off I'm going to be. Anyway, because the workshop requires the student to think deeply about what they are saying and why. And then also, I'll just read the rest. They are required to consider the relationship between feeling and reality, to think about why people commit impulsive or chaotic or tragic acts, and inevitably these thoughts end up looping back to their own lives. Like, there's like in like 3 or 4 sentences that's the whole structure of creative writing workshops, I think. And then the rest of the book, you don't have to stop reading on page 2, like, because you need, like, there's how complicated that becomes in its specific iterations becomes a really interesting journey. I got more to say about it later, but like,
yes, I mean, I think I was absolutely trying to map that territory, and I'm sure I've only caught the edges of it. But because every teacher will have their own kind of proclivities and methods and topics and ways in. But the thing that happens every time is that there is an emotional education just in the very basic fact of showing somebody else something that you have made, and doing that publicly in front of other people, which is scary. And then becomes less scary as the group begins to know each other. And I think the evidence that I would have for that, it's not, there are 2 kinds of evidence. The first evidence, which is obviously anecdotal, which is that you know and I know how well the students get on when they've been in a writing workshop. They all come together. I've got groups that I've taught 20 years ago who are still friends with each other, who are still sharing, they go to each other's parties, they share each other's celebrations, celebrate each other's successes, and keep in very strong contact with each other. Where in adult life do you make friends like that? Very rarely. And that, just as anecdotal evidence, all through my teaching career, I've had every group that I've taught has kept in touch with each other. And then the actual empirical evidence, which is recent, and I think that this study somehow disappeared under the radar, and I was very happy to see it, which was that Oxford University and Ohio University recently did a study. They did 10 weeks of storytelling with students from Kentucky, and they discovered that their empathy towards each other, the exercise was really interesting. They had to tell a story to each other, and then they had to retell that story in the first person as if they were that person. So they were being invited to take on the story of somebody sitting next to them and then write that story. And their empathy towards their classmates was raised by 13%. The students, the affective polarization was reduced by quite a significant amount. And they were measuring in real time what we've been quietly doing in workshops for ages. And they suddenly realized, oh, actually, this method helps people to sit together in a room and understand each other. And we've always said that literature does that. It promotes empathy. Reading a story that's not about you helps you to think about how somebody else might live their life. But that's also happening in a creative writing workshop in a very, very live way. when somebody is sitting there kind of telling their story and thinking about some of the, or even you just throw them an exercise, like you give them an exercise, something really simple, like tell me the story of your journey to work today. And I'll have 15 people writing 15 different work trips. Even if they've all taken the tube, something will have happened that would be different, or they would have approached it in a different way, or they'll have written it from a different point of view. They'll have used different kinds of language to articulate their experience. And that immediately gets them in touch with their sense of subjectivity. They're like, oh, yeah, I have a point of view. And actually, I don't need to ask AI what to think about things. I know what I think about things. And oh, yes, that person's outfit really intrigued me. Or I noticed that they were carrying a beat up Nike sports bag and the zip was missing. Or I noticed they were carrying a Harrods shopping bag and I started making up stories about them. You know, immediately as human beings, we start to do that in our daily lives. We sit in a room together, we share that experience. And I think something very profound is happening. And I think that that's a profound thing to be happening right now. We might have said 20 years ago, when the critique of creative writing courses was, oh, everybody wants to write a bestseller and, you know, half of them can't write, was that the product was the end result and the process didn't matter. Now I think the process really, 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 really matters, because we're up against a machine that can produce the product. So the
That's like
process is something else.
that is a thing that like runs all the way through the book as well. Like I've got like so many notes where you about moments where you put your finger on exactly not just like the, oh, this is about process, but what is important about a particular moment of process. In the beginning of your
Yes.
answer there, you said something about like, oh, this is the territory. And I was really glad because to me, like the middle chapter of this book is called, let me get the exact
It's the one
title,
on territory.
the lesson of territory. And to me, the lesson of territory is like, it's not just like, this isn't just me being cute because it's in the middle of the book, but it is like the central chapter of this whole book and the whole thing that matters about what you're talking about all the way through this book. And so I'm going to read more of your book at you.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
and this is on page 156. And there's like, in my notes, which I won't go into all because we don't have time today, but like I have like all these other references to millions of other parts of the millions, like a strong handful of other parts of the book. Let's go with dozens that this relates to. But it seems to me that this is the center piece of everything that's at stake in this book. Um, Another perhaps better way to think about it might be territory. It's not only what the writer is looking at, but also the place and time and space that they are speaking from. Acknowledging this territory can be a way for a writer to find their sense of subject, to begin to see the place in the world for their work. And like the reason that I think this is such a centerpiece of everything is because it means literally what it means here.
Hmm.
About a writer and their work. But this is like, then you start thinking about the work and like the preceding paragraph builds towards this as well, where you talk about the in creative impulse not being an indulgence, which is kind of echoing like Audre Lorde, right? Like poetry is not a luxury, and
Yes.
and those kinds of arguments. But I'm not sure we have time to go into that as much detail as I would be happy to right now. But like, so I'll keep this quick. But like, so like you're building towards that being more than just a statement about a writer and their work and going, oh yeah, it's not just like my territory isn't just like, oh, I need to readjust my point of view here or whatever it is. It's like your territory as your way of living your life is a thing you're learning
Yes.
there. And it's
Yes.
like, and it's just like the thing that runs through this whole book. And every one of these examples is like another iteration of that. The there's a, oh, I don't know. I've got like five other disparate things to like tangentially jump
Oh,
off from
I'm
there,
glad you liked it.
but I won't. But I
I'm
think
glad you
that's like the
liked it.
key lesson to me is that one is like what you're learning in this room, uh, and in this process as a student and a teacher and a writer and a person is like this. Like I'm learning to know my territory. Like every almost every chapter you have a student saying like eventually when they hit their wall of frustration, like one by one they go like, but it happened like this, and you know,
Yes.
and like and eventually you do a really nice job with that element of it. That's like such a key element of a writing workshop when you've taught enough of them. It's like someone going, but that's how it happened. And there's lots of like nice and not so nice ways you can respond to that as a teacher, and many
Well, I
teachers
think
have
one
like,
has to kind of honor that.
yeah, yeah, you have to honor that, but also say that that's not the whole thing. And
Yes.
you address this at numerous points in the in the thing in the book itself. And like there's a really nice point, and I don't know exactly what page it's on, where you quote Colin Barrett talking about this.
Oh
And
yeah.
he says like basically like it's about turning Mayo, is it County Mayo where he's from, and like creating this
Yes.
fictional version of it so that he could write about it in a
Well,
in a
I
way that
remember.
was doing it more justice. And it was like once I gave it the sheen of fiction, I could write about it more honestly. And that kind of
Yes.
getting away from like or understanding that your imagination is a thing that is not like it's not divorced from reality is a really hard thing, I think, for people to learn.
Well, I think there were two things I was trying to think about as well. I think that and I'm sure you've experienced it too, that in the kind of 2010s, there was a real kind of concern about representation sort of running
Hmm.
through the classroom and about who can be represented and who can be written
Yeah.
about. And I felt that the critical theory, which I do think reached a certain dead end after a point, just because it stopped being generative. It was closing everything down, which
Hmm.
is anti-creative in my view. People should be able to create, and imagine. And it was shutting down the imagination. It was saying, no, you can't imagine this, and you can't imagine that. You've got to only imagine things that come from your particular point of view. So I suppose in a way I was trying to answer that and create the space for that particular point of view. Because I don't think it's very helpful to approach creative writing from the position of theory. I think you can get to
Hmm.
the theory through the practice of writing, but you have to put your skin in the game first and try things out and think things through. And it's a really, really helpful way of thinking through the subjectivity of somebody else, but also to have that somebody else in your classroom telling you, this is my experience of this situation. So this is my experience of forced migration. So when you write a character that's a refugee, these are all the things you're getting wrong because you haven't experienced it. And that conversation is happening live rather than a corrective on social media, which is much more, which much more destructive. It puts people back on their back foot. They're not actually thinking, they're not discussing, they're not sharing. And at the same time, this idea that somehow we have to valorize people who've suffered can be just terrible people too. And in storytelling, we work with difficult characters. So, there's an example again in the book of somebody who is, in my imagination, is a human rights lawyer or has done a lot of legal work around this kind of issue and can't quite get her head around writing a character who's both a victim and somebody difficult. So she sort of valorizes all her victim characters and they're all very saintly and they're all very too good to be true. And actually that makes for very bad storytelling because the characters are very flat because you're just making them into these all good people rather than these complicated people. I mean, I'd look back at something like Chinua Achebe, things fall apart.
Hmm.
And the character in that's dreadful, but things fall apart because he's dreadful. That's the whole point of the book. That's why we write these stories. We write because we want to think about complicated people and their complicated lives and the complicated reasons for existing, rather than sort of standing on high and going, oh, you can't write that because structurally X, Y, Z. It's useless. It's not generative. It's closing things down. It comes from a position of control. And I think it's really, really important for and English as a subject. So the thing I want to argue for, if there's something to argue for in this book, is that we use the workshop methodology more in teaching literature in order to encourage people to read more, to write more, and to speak more, and to listen more. The workshop needs to be not separate from. It's part of English studies. It should be a holistic part of what we offer rather than just. And I think there's an issue for me too with, and I'm talking to English teachers. Sometimes I've done in-service training days and so on for English teachers, and they're like, "Yeah, but I'm not a writer. I don't know how to do these workshops. I can't do this kind of teaching because I don't write." And I really want to say to them, but you tell stories. You tell stories in your head every day about who you are and what you think and how you live your life. You're a storyteller. That's all you've got to bring to the room is this understanding of yourself as a storyteller. Whether you actually write as a practice every day or you've written a novel or not, it doesn't matter. It's not about product. It's about the process that the workshop invites people to participate in.
Can I read another passage from your book to you?
Yeah.
Because this, I think a lot of what you've been saying, like this is in the same chapter because it's the
Uh,
central chapter of the book, page
yeah, no, I was happy with that
168.
chapter.
Page 168. These issues don't come up by accident in the writing workshop because to write anything, we must have a vantage point, a place of
Yeah.
reference. We must consider the ground under our feet and the place on the planet on which we stand. We have to take responsibility for our territory and claim our own authority over it. And I would add, personally. Also, we need to claim our own lack of authority over things. That's explicit in
Yes,
other
yes,
places
yes,
in the book, to be fair. I'm not
yes, yes, yes.
criticizing. And you go on, the whole
No,
paragraph is worth reading. It takes up the whole page, or almost the whole page, and I don't want to take time to read. I don't want to read that much to you, because it's weird listening to someone else read your book at you. But it seems to me all that stuff that you've been saying is built in there, like exactly that kind of thing of like studying a work of literature or being a teacher unsure of where they sit as a writer is part of that territory, is part of that reference point in a
yes.
classroom or anywhere else. And like, just take responsibility for that and own that. Like, I do this all the time in classrooms when I'm teaching literature, because I have students who are much more interested in the kind of theoretical and critical approaches than I am. And they'll ask me questions that I just don't know the answers to, partly because I don't care enough in certain ways about some things. And I'll just say, like, well, my approach isn't that. Like, I don't know, you tell me. You know more about this than I do. And like, my interest here is, as a writer, how this thing works and
I
what the
think I
effects of
think the
that. And
thing
like,
with oh, sorry, Doug, go on.
no, that's right. I was gonna say, just like knowing that, like starting to understand yourself in that position, and say,
Mm.
like, where you're willing to make yourself vulnerable as a student and a teacher is something like you really get a lot of experience of in a creative writing workshop. Again, because I don't have any authority over a story a student sends into me. It's their story.
No,
They're literally the author of it. I have zero authority over it. I have authority over a conversation because I'm leading a classroom. I have authority over certain ways of using language because I've been doing it a lot longer than they have. But ultimately, that's even a pretty diminished authority, because all I can say is, like, this is what I think might work for you. And again, to come back to what I said earlier, they might think I'm one of the idiots who every time I open my mouth, I'm giving them lousy advice. And so that just like,
yeah.
then that authority vanishes again. And it doesn't matter.
I don't feel like as it's an interesting. I think that's the thing I didn't do in the book, partly because I felt like maybe I was holding it back for another moment or for an essay or something, and I had gone on too long. I was going to do a sort of ending, which was about the teacher and the position of the
Mm.
teacher in the space, but I felt like somehow that would be breaking the fourth wall of
Yeah.
what I'd been trying to do in the book. But I think, my job isn't to be. I don't. There's so many things I don't know. It's not about me knowing or not knowing. It's about creating the space in which the students can have that conversation and can speak and can talk to each other. I learned so much. I mean, that's one of the things I'm so grateful for about my job, and the reason I stayed at Birkbeck so long is that I felt like I learned so much from my students. Every cohort brings in something new into the room. They all have interesting jobs. They've all had lives. They've all got things to teach me, and that in itself becomes a sort of and that's a pleasure for the other people in the room too. Where else in your life are you going to have a croupier in the Ritz Casino sitting next to somebody who's run a beauty business, sitting next to somebody who's a teacher, sitting next to somebody who's retired from working in Lloyd's of London? All of this experience that comes together in the space is fascinating, I think. And I think that it speaks to something else that I think we've lost to a certain extent the pandemic, the AI, the technology, and so on, is really this capacity to honor each other's subjectivity and space that we take up in the world. I find that the you must not and you should, and the cancel culture sort of tendency of the internet to sort everybody into these sort of algorithmic blocks is really unhelpful to the kind of sense of social fabric. And the classroom is one of these few places where I feel like it still happens.
But you also have I was thinking of the chapter with where you talk about it's not therapy.
Yes.
So you also, I mean, I agree with everything you've said, but you also have your teacher character, you comes out with some quite interesting kind of boundaries, it seemed to me, which I think it's writing and not therapy is quite an important one.
Yes, it's writing and not therapy because we're trying to tell a story. So it's mediated through the thing that we're actually looking at, which is storytelling. So does this transmit as a story? So when we go back to that thing Doug said, oh yes, but it's true, it happened to me that way. We can discuss the interesting gap between, well, it happened to me that way, but that didn't make it a good story. There's a really interesting book actually by Vivian Gornick called The Situation and the Story, where she
I
makes,
just turned to the quotation
yeah,
from that about
it's
that's
such a
exactly
great
so
book, where she makes
yeah,
such a good distinction between what is a situation. So, I lived in Thailand. Well, what's the story? You could write endless
yeah,
chapters about the sort of what Thailand looked like, but what's the story of living in Thailand or living in Spain or whatever it is that you want to bring to the room?
yeah. She
And
says
that,
the
yeah,
situation
go.
is the situation is the context or circumstance, sometimes the plot. The story is the emotional experience that preoccupies the writer, the insight, the wisdom, the thing one has come to say. Um,
Yes.
there's like a whole other hour of discussion to be built on the back of that, but
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I also think that's a real fundamental to teaching storytelling is what did
yeah.
you come into the room to say? There's you've had a little play around maybe as a writer, you've written a few little things, but then underneath that starts to come something that is
Hmm.
quite representative of that particular person, whether that's writing a vampire novel or writing some realism or writing some Victorian historical novel, whatever it is that they want to write. There's a
Yeah.
bubbling up underneath is something, there's a desire. I always tell the students to follow a desire, follow the thing that you want. What is it? And it takes a while sometimes to dig down into that and
Hmm.
figure out what it is. And that I talk about in the beginning, partly sometimes because there's lots of anonymous authorities in the way. Oh, it's a bit embarrassing to be interested in fantasy, or oh, I shouldn't really be writing a crime novel, I should write a literary fiction, or oh, various received opinions about what kinds of stories are good and what kinds of stories are bad. And that again, we have a whole other conversation about morality and storytelling.
Yeah.
The whole thing bounces off into another conversation. This is the interesting thing about teaching it. It's a live, it's sort of like this live performance moment space where people, all of these things come up at any given moment in the, I can't write a syllabus for it. That's what I think I'm trying to say. I think there are topics we can discuss, but the syllabus is made by the student,
Yeah.
which I think makes it interesting.
Yeah. And a place you have to pay attention to. So
Yeah.
part of the between the lines is paying radical attention to your teaching space.
Yes. Yes. I think maybe that's the thing that the teacher needs to have, because I have had teaching experiences in the past, not now, but in the dim distant past. So let's put 2000 as a gap, where it really was just sort of kiss my ring. It was the bishop
Mm.
turning up and expecting the class to genuflect and go, oh, famous writer, somehow I'm going to learn by osmosis from you how to write a great book. And there was no pedagogy and there was no thinking about what was actually happening in the room. And quite often teaching was a bit bad. And actually what would happen quite often would be that the class would carry the room, not the teacher. The famous writer would just sort of sit there.
Hmm.
And I mean, Doug is nodding because he went to those classes. And
But
no names.
but
But
that
yeah.
that is one of the great things about teaching in the humanities, is that in fact I want to say you sometimes don't need a teacher. It can sometimes just happen.
Yes.
Precisely because of the way it's set up and the kind of context, which I know the teacher sets up. But it just that seems to
We'll
be
start abolishing teachers, Bob.
well, I
Yes.
don't know. I'm always keen to abolish teachers.
Yeah.
I mean, not in the,
I th-
not but to think that's about authority and
Yeah.
control. Oh, and
Yeah.
cats. Oh, abolish cats.
oh, hello, cats. Yes, my cat's sleeping.
Um, we have had some questions coming in as well.
Yes,
So,
we.
Yeah. Fire
so
away.
in the chat, we've got Katie Takuna Lewin says, "Thank you, Julie. You've used the word skill a few times. I wonder how you see the current necessity of higher education to be linked with employability to relate to real life skills, knowledge students learn in the creative writing workshops."
Yes, skills. Ew, sorry. But I suppose I am thinking though that knowledge skill, if you want to put it in those terms, just so that the people who policify what we do can think about what I'm trying to say, is that I do genuinely think that learning to pay attention to other people and attend to the writing of other people is a knowledge skill, which is then transferable into other, we talk about people's attention being fritzed, which it is. And I teach a workshop, and for 3 hours, people are sitting there and they're not looking at their phone and they're really engaged and they're talking to each other. I mean, it's maybe not even a skill, it's just remembering that we have that capacity.
I think
and
it
it's a
is though a
place where we can
skill.
practice that
Sorry.
capacity.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think it is also a skill insofar as like one of what they're doing during those like 3 hours or whatever is like it's not just about the capacity to pay attention, but they're like the type of attention you're paying. You're thinking very carefully and very critically about
yeah,
small and large things, and you're solving problems that are linguistic problems, they're storytelling problems, they're, as we've already discussed over the last 45 minutes or so, they're problems of authority and position and territory and whatever. And like these are really complicated skills that you cannot
yes,
like that like chat gpt is not going to tell you that skill, and then you can just take it and like into a workplace. And you know, human beings need those skills in order to function as human beings, and the enterprises that human beings undertake, commercial or otherwise, require those skills and those abilities. And I think to like address this in like terms of like AI and technology, whatever, we're and before very long, I've been giving this like way too much, like really half baked thought for the last few days. Um, uh, like before very long, I think like really quickly, everyone's going to discover that these are exactly the skills, these knowledge skills, as you call them, that like are going to be what people like, holy crap,
yes.
we've made these obsolete from our education system, and they are in no way, shape, or form if obsolete from our day-to-day human enterprise environment. Again, like I mean that more like more widely than just like a career or industry or whatever, because I don't really think in those terms because I've been a teacher my whole life. Um, but like they're even more necessary in a world where AI is processing things, where smaller and smaller numbers of people are blasting you with information, both real and
Thank
mis.
you.
And
Yeah,
like these are exactly the skills that you have to have, or the whole thing collapses. And I think
totally.
even just like a company collapses without those skills, let alone a civilization. And companies, because they're interested in making money, are going to learn that real fast because they're going to need it to make money.
Yeah, I
Anyway,
think
that's
honestly,
my. I'll get off my
humanities. No, no,
soapbox
no,
now.
no, no, no. I honestly think creative writing is going to have a moment on the back of all of this in a really surprising
I
way
think it's
that
already
nobody,
happening.
yeah, that nobody kind of thought about, and now they're like, oh, actually, these skills are things that creative writing is sort of. Maybe what I was trying to do was articulate them in a way that people
Yeah,
can understand.
yeah.
Because I really think what we do is really going to be is so important for the future.
So that's the show not tell, I mean I don't want to put it into a wider context, but when people talked about English and being invented in the 1920s, and they talked about spirit and so on, it was exactly these human things that Doug was talking about and your book is about, that seem to be so important for the discipline, which then get covered over in things. And I think that the kind of uncovering of them in between the lines and in your work is really important. I suppose
Thank you.
one of the first things as a young academic in my department, when we started having creative writing, one of the first things I noticed is that the English and creative writing students took feedback much better than the straightforward English students, precisely
Yes,
because of the nature of the workshop, which had meant they'd had to be vulnerable and then kind of resilient to that. So
yes.
I don't know if that's a way of expressing it, but I think that's an astonishing human thing to have learnt, to be vulnerable and resilient at the same time. And I think that's a
It's also a
creative
very
writing.
easy thing to translate to other disciplines
Yeah.
classrooms. Like I teach an English literature, or it's an American literature class, but it's not a creative writing class in any way, shape, or form. And we workshop stuff in there for a lot of different reasons. But that's one of them. And so like students have to, as part of their reading a book and talking about a book, they have to make themselves vulnerable in that way by submitting a bit of work that they thought, and it's also setting the agenda for the class. So like I'm abolishing the teacher in that respect, Bob, like just like you want me to.
Yeah.
Like, but like it's an interesting thing to see students who aren't necessarily, creative writing students know they're going to have to do that, and a literature student doesn't necessarily know they're going to have to do that, and then they get confronted with it, and they respond really nicely to it.
Yeah.
Because it is
I
scary.
think
I
it's
get
a,
it.
yeah, but it's also the thing that I think that's really important about it is questioning the way that we tell
Yeah.
stories to ourselves and to each other is the only way that we're going to, if you think, oh, how am I going to change my life, or how's my life going to change? Interrogating that is the only way that things are going to shift. So one of the things that I think Chris Frith says that thinking is movement, and the phone is designed to keep you static in front of the screen. If we can't think, we're not going to be able to move. So there's something. So my sort of math with that is attention is thinking. Thinking is movement. And if we have no access to our attention, we can't think, therefore we can't move. So that space where you can sort of be with other people, there's movement in the room, we're talking to each other, we're listening, we're telling stories. Yeah, I think we need it now more than ever, because the idea that there would be a kind of government of grievance, which is what we know Nigel Farage is banging the drum for, really frightens me. And I would want to encourage people to sort of set about it. It's not just about sort of, oh, it's the scary thing to tell my story. It's a necessary thing to tell your story. It's a necessary thing also to listen to the story of somebody else who might be voting for a party you don't like, or have opinions that you're not comfortable with, rather than shutting them down before they open their mouth. To be uncomfortable maybe with these various kinds of storytelling. Because I sort of feel like the student that sometimes turns up and goes, oh, I'm really frightened of showing my work to other people, is also telling themselves a story about what might happen in that moment. And that might not turn out that way. It doesn't have to be scary.
So, you know how when you read two books at the same time, or lots of books at the same time, and a books that you read.
Not all of us can do that,
No, but I mean,
I do, yeah, and they all mush in together.
They reflect on each other interestingly. So I've just been reading a book called Hyperpolitics, which is
Oh yes,
so
I've got it.
Yeah, it's a bit like long New York Times articles strung together. But I see there's another question coming. But that's also about atomization and different kinds of associations. And what you're talking about really is creating forms of association around dissensus, which allows people to be together, even though they don't agree.
And Raymond Williams. I mean, I think you said once I was a Leaver site. I'm more of a Raymond Williams fan, really.
Yeah.
He's the one who attaches education to democracy. The creation of an educated and participating democracy is the thing that he says in, I think, Culture and Society is what he's trying to do. And I think if we stand a chance of holding democracy together, having spaces where people can tell stories to each other and be heard is really, really important.
Well, let's just ask this quick question from Andrew Green, which rates that, and then we'll wrap up after that. So Andrew says, in relation to where students are coming from, the latest iteration of the English national curriculum does not include the words creative, creativity, or creatively. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I've got lots of them.
Okay, so relatively brief thoughts, please.
Oh, geez. Should I go first or should you?
Yes, go first. Yeah.
Because, there used to be a creative writing A level, and it was really nice, I think. And I actually think so. I don't think creative writing as a university subject has necessarily gotten any bigger over the last few years, but at a time when lots of other disciplines are seeing a drop off in enrollment for exactly those kinds of reasons, like the way that they're presented at A level, and what is and isn't required and all that kind of stuff. We don't have to go and relitigate the Gove years now, because I was told to be brief. But creative writing seems to just maintain at least where I teach, and I think it's true in other places, a pretty steady whatever the word is, intake of students or whatever. There's this the same number, sometimes a little more, studying it year on year on year. And I think that the reason for that is it's exactly because those words don't appear anywhere in the curriculum. And it to me is a demonstration of how almost all the things that Julie and I have been talking about. People want these things. People want this kind of education, this access to knowledge, this way of being in the world, and they want instruction in it so that they can feel safe when they're learning how to do it, so that they can feel smarter by the end of it. And I think that's exactly these things being shut out of curriculum decisions lower down are ignorant or short-sighted or whatever, but they don't suppress the desire in any individual person, young or old, to pursue these things. So I know there's we alluded earlier to like adult education things. There's a reason that adults go to like learn
Yes.
things, and that these like the provision of these things is so important. Is because people have a desire to learn things and to have these conversations and to do it in a space where there's like some rules and there's some safety, like a safe space is not
Yeah, I
a
think, wait, I
negative
mean,
term in that respect. And like and all of that is anyway, sorry, I've
no,
not
no,
been
no,
great.
I wanted to say that I think creative writing methodology should be almost separated out from the subject, and that I
Mhm.
would want to see people doing workshop as a matter of, it should be part of the education system from year dot all the way up to
Yeah.
university, whatever your subject is. I mean, I'm external examiner at Imperial College, and one of the interesting things about Imperial was that they set up a creative writing degree because their science students weren't getting jobs and they couldn't figure out why. And it was because they didn't know how to articulate what they knew. They
Hmm.
didn't know how to talk they didn't know how to talk about the science and the discoveries that they were making. So they have this now, they have to do these humanities electives and they can do creative writing, which is obviously the most popular one. And some of the work is fantastic. There's a beautiful thesis that I read last year that was on physics and poetry and why they're the same thing, which of course they are. So this ridiculous split between humanities and science, which we all know, and I wrote about it on my Substack. The herd just ran off going, oh, STEM, STEM, STEM. I'm going to get a job coding. And then suddenly we learn that Claude can do all the coding. And they're like, oh no, there's no jobs for me now. What do I do? And they're kind of running back in my direction. And I'm like, look, this is stupid to separate it out like this. The point of a good education is rounded. It should be to give you these skills and then maybe also to teach you some stuff about physics and maybe to teach you some other things about, I don't know, whatever you want to know about neurobiology. But at the end of the day, storytelling should be part of that, sitting down, listening to other people, workshopping, thinking about how we narrate our lives and how our lives are narrated back at us is a sort of fundamental baseline. It's a knowledge skill that you need before everything else happens. So I think that's the line that I'm taking and
So
have taken in the writing of the book.
I think with that, which I think I certainly agree with, and I can see Becky agrees with as well.
Yeah.
And
I
so,
disagree. No, I don't.
oh no, so
Yeah.
I'd like to thank Doug, and I'd like to thank Julia as well for taking part, and Julia for writing your really remarkable book.
Thank
Um,
you.
thank you very much. I'd like to thank the audience, and as always, thank Becky and the English Association for hosting us and our conversation. Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
indeed, and I'll
Thanks,
draw it to a
everybody.
close. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.